for those students. It shows kind of international scout places where they can look and find international scholarship jobs. We do also. We also sell coffee, and this coffee is grown in the tropics in Dean's Beans coffee throughout the world, and this coffee Cafe Solar in Honduras, and then have some hot cocoa for sale as well, as if anybody wants to buy any cocoa or hot chocolate, cocoa or coffee for the holidays. We also provide grants for students to do research and service projects internationally. And so Phoebe last year got a grant from IAC and now is presenting on her work. So yeah, just introducing Phoebe, Con Bio master's student at Antioch in her second or third year.
Final year, third year.
Final year. And she'll be presenting, she'll tell us all about her work with manatees in Belize, I believe.
Yes, yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I want to make sure everyone can hear me on Zoom and then also can hear me in person.
Essa menina, essa é a TA, tá analisando meu paper.
And I'm gonna just make sure everyone's muted. Cool. All right. Okay. Welcome everyone, both in person and virtual. It's so nice to see a lot of familiar faces, both in person and on Zoom. And I'm excited to talk to you guys today. I'd like to start by thanking the Institute for International Conservation, without whom this work would not have been possible. So thank you so much for your support, and hopefully we'll be able to work together again in the future. So today I will be discussing the research I did in Belize on acoustic and behavioral response of the wild Antillean manatee to playbacks of conspecifics. So, all right, can everyone see that on Zoom as well? Perfect. Okay, so just to set the stage a little bit, in April of this year, I got the opportunity to travel to Maya Beach, Belize, and work with my two external committee members, Dr. Beth Brady and Dr. Eric Angel Ramos, researching wild manatees. We worked with Antillean manatees specifically, recording their acoustic and behavioral response to different pre-recorded vocalizations from wild Florida manatees. So manatees use different calls to communicate with one another, similar to whale acoustics or other marine mammals. And understanding their calls and social behaviors is critical to understanding how they communicate with one another. And, great. So some general ecology to provide a little background. Great. Switch. Antillean manatees are in the Sirenia order, and this includes herbivorous marine mammals that inhabit estuaries, rivers, or other shallow coastal waters. The Antillean manatee and the Florida manatee are actually both subspecies of the West Indian manatee, so they're closely related. Wild Florida manatee calls are what we played to the wild Antillean manatees. And they're both also closely related to the West African, the Amazonian manatee, dugongs, and the now extinct sea cow. So an adult manatee can actually weigh up to 3,000 pounds and grow over 14 feet in length. They're herbivores. So their primary food source is aquatic vegetation, such as eelgrass and other seagrass species. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about my research objectives, which is essentially the why are we doing this research. The Antillean manatee is an understudied marine mammal species whose coastal habitats frequently overlap with human coastal development and watercraft activities. So they are protected currently they're classified as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. They're protected, but there has been a widespread petition to reclassify them as endangered, especially because recently, I think over the last year, we've lost about 2,000 Florida manatees specifically, which is an estimated 20% of their population size. So that's a big decrease. And this is only one area of scientific research stating why it's important to reinstate their endangered protection. But the ESA is taking this under advisement, which is good. So my research objectives they were to identify acoustic and behavioral trends in manatee activity at their critical habitats in Maya Beach, southeastern Belize. So my research aims to identify acoustic and behavioral trends in manatee activity acoustic and social behavior along the southeastern coast of Belize to better understand their behavioral ecology, their movement patterns, and vulnerabilities to human activities in critical microhabitats. So understanding how wild manatees respond to calls from conspecifics, in this case, the Florida manatee was used, has not been studied or understood in depth yet. So one of the goals of this research is to provide some insight into what call types wild manatees will respond to and how. So for example, there's a call type I'll show you. It's the squeal. Is this considered aggressive or a warning sign of danger? You know, this research can help kind of identify that. So this information can be used to inform conservation management of this threatened species and also help guide recommendations for future conservation efforts. All right. Okay, so great, switched. So all the research was done in Maya Beach, and if you can see in this map, can you guys all see that okay? Yeah, okay. So Belize is in Central America, and so this is a map of Central America, and the little icon you can see, that's Belize. And then when you zoom further in, I specifically worked in Maya Beach, and these two icons that you can see, those were definitely the main research sites that we did most of our observations from. And so that's kind of just a general overview. So we paddled out to our research sites at about 6 a.m. every morning because the sun gets pretty hot in Belize, so you have to start early. The sites varied every day depending on where the manatees were and what their activity was. So once we got out to the site, we anchored and deployed our acoustic equipment, and there was also a drone being operated from shore. All right, so changed. So again, all the research was done in Maya Beach, Belize. So we worked under permits that were authorized by the government of Belize, which allowed us to work with the wild manatees. And then as you can see in the photo, the middle one, that's actually the kayak. We paddled out on a double-seater kayak for a couple reasons. One of which being the expense of, renting a boat, a research vessel, bigger than this. However, they also, kind of the primary reason really was they spook pretty easily. Manatees in this lagoon that we were working with weren't as used to boat activity, say as like the Florida manatee might be. So they were even spooking before we got there, just to a kayak showing up. So we really needed to be careful with that. So that's part of the reason. So from the kayak, we deployed several acoustic devices, including a hydrophone, which you can see in this picture. Can you see my mouse? Yes. So the hydrophone is protected by a very sophisticated pool noodle. And the case protected the recording device that could not get wet. But the hydrophone was put in the water about 2 feet down. The lagoon was actually pretty shallow. It was, we were paddling across the entire lagoon, but it was really like 5 feet deep. You could stand if you needed to, most of the lagoon. So again, from the kayak, we deployed the hydrophone and to record, that actually recorded the acoustics. And then also an underwater speaker, which you can see in this photo. And then Dr. Beth Brady actually put together this PVC frame so that we could deploy it from the kayak and not have it get damaged. So those were our primary equipment that we used while we were actually out on the water. So we paddled out around 6 a.m. We got back in around 10 or 11. And our research sites, as I said, varied daily. And then Dr. Eric Angel Ramos, he would find where the manatees were gathering that morning, because again, it did change. And then we would paddle out, record the behavior response of the manatees. So we actually worked with specifically 4 different manatee call types. And we played them. So we played the wild manatees, the Florida wild manatee calls, and they were the squeak, the high squeak, the squeal, and the chewing vocalizations. So I will play some examples of that on the next slide. Okay, so this is definitely a little loud, so people on Zoom, if you need to adjust your volume, but let me know also if you can hear it. We'll start with the squeal call. Oops. Can you guys hear it? Okay, I don't know if could you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's as loud as my computer will go, unfortunately. So this is the chewing. And then this is the high squeak. And then this is a squeak. Right. And then when I'm going through, when we're going through the data, you're not actually really listening to the call. Sometimes I listen to it to see if I could hear that it was there and I was correctly finding a call. But so the images that you can see here are kind of how the calls show up. These ones were the pre-recorded calls, and the hydrophone and the speaker were really close together just because of the vessel that we were using. So the picture you can see here, that's actually what would show up as we were analyzing the acoustic data. It would look more like that. It wouldn't be so black and like bold and distinct. And so we played each of these call types that you can see here a total of 3 times, each for 1 minute and 40 seconds. And we would actually like go out one day. We didn't want to stress them out too much. So we did this over a span of a week, and we would play typically 2 call types to them. And then we would, leave the research site because we didn't want to stress the animal out and possibly have that affect our results. So let's see. So yeah, we played a total of 12 calls were played over the course of a week. We estimate that we worked with anywhere from 6 manatees to there was one day when we were surrounded by like 50 or 60 of them. Couldn't see them all, but when we looked back at the video, there was a lot. That was pretty cool. After we got out to the research site, we anchored the kayak and deployed the equipment. We would start by recording both with the hydrophone and with the drone for 5 minutes before we played the playback call, during the playback call, and then for 5 minutes after the playback call. And let's see, so then to kind of talk about how we analyze the acoustic data. It was collected and analyzed using the computer software Raven Pro 1.6 that was created by Cornell. And we created selection tables. There we go. So this is a spectrogram. So the spectrogram is basically a graph of sound. So on the x-axis, you can see it's in time, in minutes, and then seconds. And then the y-axis is frequencies in kilohertz. So that's kind of what you're looking at. And what you can see from this picture is, so those are the pre-recorded sounds. So they show up really bold. And then just go. So the call types, we found them. Let's see, we're going to the next. Okay. Has it changed? Great. So this is what so I would create selection tables. I would go through the data and then I would box off a call. So these green ones are already selected, and there's a red one you can see. And you can annotate it and you can choose what you measure. So in this particular selection table, it shows the beginning time, the ending time, the low frequency, and the high frequency of whatever you're selecting. And you can add and manipulate this how you want, depending on what you're looking for. So yeah, I would go through and select calls and annotate when we started and stopped observations. And depending on the quality of the call, further analysis can be done, like looking at the entropy, the duration, or the frequency modulation measurements. And this could be something we could do in the future with the data we have. All right, so let's talk about some of the preliminary results. So what have we found so far? So did the playback calls impact acoustic or behavioral activity of the wild Antillean manatees? That's what we were kind of trying to find. So first classification of the calls for the playback sessions, they were classified according to Dr. Beth Brady. A total of 200 calls were analyzed in total and categorized. One of the things we were looking for from our first overview of the acoustic data was a change in the vocalization rate. So when we got there and played them, say the squeak call, did it dramatically increase from the before to the after of our observations? So that's one big reason we did those observations. So yeah, did the playback calls have an impact on the response rate of the wild Antillean manatees? This is still unclear. So far, we haven't found a significant difference in response rate from our first overview of the acoustic results. However, upon viewing the video data, there are a lot of great surprising and hopefully significant behavioral responses. So to recap, the 4 call types we played were again squeak, high squeak, squeal, and chewing. So from what we know so far, the squeak call is the most commonly used. and it's used to communicate with other manatees. It's not considered an aggressive call. So in fact, when this call type was played to a group of cavorting manatees, so they were very active, 3 manatees that we could actually see from the kayak, popped their head up and swam like right over to the boat, which is that was the sound source. So that's a good indication that it is in fact not considered an aggressive call. And yeah, they made a beeline. And then the squeal call type is kind of the opposite. It's considered either aggressive or a warning call. There's still research being done to actually find out, what that call type is. And hopefully this research will help with that. So when we played that call, no manatees actually came to the boat. So there's a very big difference, I guess, big contrast in how they responded. So significant as it supports that this call type, the squeal, would be used as aggressive or a cautionary means of communication. And then the chewing call type is important because it's the sound manatees make when they're eating, right? And it can indicate to other manatees that there's a food source nearby. So we were curious, would they be interested? Would they come over and want to join? There was no significant increase in calls after the chewing sound was played from our preliminary data. But more investigation again is needed into video footage to see what they were doing. So that was the acoustic analysis. And then so the video analysis could kind of give us more insight into that, if there was significance there. And finally, the high squeak is a call type of a young calf. And when played, the preliminary results were very interesting. Just mute that. Okay. And so in fact, possibly the most surprising preliminary results we've found so far is that a mother actually left her calf to go investigate when we played the high squeak call. So I'm going to play the video for you guys, and hopefully you can see it on Zoom. All right, can you guys also see there? Can you see where my mouse is circling? So that is the mother, and there's a calf right there. It's definitely hard to see. So you can kind of see the mom swimming towards the sound source, which is the kayak. And I'm gonna actually, the best way to really watch it, if you guys have an eye on the mother, and you can kind of see her trajectory, she goes over and investigates, and she particularly investigates leaving her calf alone. So this video, you can see after the call was played, the mother made a direct, do you guys want me to play that again?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Okay, so can you see I'm circling where the mother is and then where the calf is? So if I move this bar, do you see that mother moving away from the calf? And I can point it out too. Can you guys all see that? Okay. So she's swimming away, leaving the calf alone to go investigate the call. And this was after we played the high squeak call. And then she kind of disappears, but she investigates a lot and then swims back. And that's kind of where I cut it. But eventually she does rejoin her calf. Okay. This is particularly surprising because she left her calf alone, more vulnerable to any possible threats. So the high squeak is a young calf call, and the mother possibly was going to investigate and see if the calf needed help or was in distress. So this preliminary result shows that the high squeak is a significant call, one that mother manatees pay special attention to and respond quickly when they hear it. So it could also indicate that manatees have a natural instinct to respond, help other distressed calves, even when they're not their own. So finally, what's next? Again, further analysis to confirm the preliminary results that we did find, to confirm if they're statistically significant. And also further analysis of the acoustic data that we have. For example, looking for good quality calls to see if they can be further analyzed. So defining what the actual call type was. For example, when we played the squeal call, did they respond with squeals? If they responded at all, or did they not respond because it was aggressive? And then also some further future work we're going to do with this data, finish developing and implementing the methods to really analyze the behavioral response, which includes looking at the video. So there's a lot of individual flights that were made with the drone. Those so far have all been compiled together. And then we have to analyze by basically taking images of those videos and potentially analyzing them image by image. So it's definitely going to be a long process, but very worth it. And then statistical analysis from the data points we get from our future analysis. So again, I just want to acknowledge the Institute for International Conservation, Antioch University of New England, Dr. Eric Angel Ramos, and Dr. Beth Brady. Dr. Dawn Murray is my academic advisor, and she has been very supportive throughout all this. Aisha as well. She was definitely the first person to introduce me to this field of research, so I'm very grateful for her. Of course, the Wild Antillean Manatees for letting us work with them. My partner who's here today, Timothy Hastings, and then my friends and family, including my cat that you can see down here. She definitely knows when you're taking a picture of her. Yes. Okay, are there any questions? Yes.
Comparing to whales. Different whales from different regions sometimes have slightly different calls. Have you considered seeing if you could get a hold of local manatee calls to try and control for any irregularities that might be introduced by using ones that might have like a different accent or dialect?
Yeah, definitely. So in this case, the Florida manatee and the Antillean manatee are both subspecies, so they are very closely related, but of course there's going to be differences. And we have so far the Florida manatee specifically, that call has been, or sorry, that subspecies has been played to other Florida manatees, so it would be different to or interesting to compare if there's a difference in those research studies compared to ours. That is a good point. Thank you. Yeah, I see. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say I see a hand. Oops.
I guess, I don't know if my hand was up first, but anyway.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for your research, sharing, Phoebe. It's really awesome work. I had two quick questions for you.
Yeah.
One, what is the frequency range of these manatees? I'm not familiar with their vocalizations. I'd love to know more about that. And then my second question involves your response rate analysis. You had mentioned that that's very preliminary, but I wondered if you could just briefly walk through kind of what you were looking for. I assume you were looking for audible responses in the data,
Yeah.
but I just kind of wondered if you could home in a little bit more on like what that entailed. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. So to start with your first question, I can see if I can go back on the slides. because I believe, oh, yeah, there we go. So you can see the frequency in this slide. Can you see it any better in the next one? Yeah. Okay. So I didn't zoom out all the way on this image, but the frequency depends on the call. For chewing, it's definitely a lower frequency range. But for this one, which I believe is a squeak, those, and it's too bad you can't see the top range of it, but it's between like 23, 25. So starting from 0. And actually the first, I meant to explain this. So you can see the bands in the call, and there is a fundamental band, and then these are harmonic going up. So that starts anywhere from like, I guess not exactly 0, but up to 1 or so. So that's kind of the range for that specific call. And then your second question, what were we looking for in the acoustic analysis? So we were looking for, first off, a change between vocalization rate. So we did the observations before we played the call, and we compared those to the vocalizations after and during, to see if the response changed, if it increased, if it decreased. So that's kind of what we did preliminarily with the results so far. Does that answer your questions?
That's great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
We
Yeah.
have another question here from Zoom, and I'm going to ask Brooke to unmute.
Hi, Phoebe.
Hi.
I loved your presentation. Yeah, I have 2 questions. I'm not sure if you stated it because it's kind of ironic. I was just having this conversation with my coworkers today, like how orcas, they have different dialects, like within different, I don't want to call them tribes or subspecies. Were you able to find like differences between the Florida and the Belize one, or is that too early to tell? And then my second question is, what was the most surprising thing you found out of this research?
Yeah. So I'll start with your first question. Myself, I think, like thinking about the research I've done, I believe there are some differences. Like I think there's a, and I can't remember exactly what it's called now, so I might have to email you with the specifics. But there's a squeak squeal that the Florida manatee make. And I think that's slightly different than the Antillean manatee, but I would have to get back to you to, substantiate that. So yeah, I can definitely email you. And then your second question was the most surprising thing that I found. I think it really was seeing the manatees, come right towards the boat and just being out with the manatees, because I actually admittedly I had never seen one before this research actually. So it was really cool to see them in the wild and see how they behave versus, in an aquarium setting. So yeah, that was really cool. Any more questions, both in person, online? Yeah. No questions in the chat? Okay.
Not that everything has to be instrumentalized, but I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, looking forward to when we better understand these calls and the way manatees might react. Can you see implications of those for conservation efforts? or
Yeah.
Management practices that, like, okay, now that we know this, maybe we can.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this is like, so the group of manatees that we worked with in Belize, they spooked very easily to boats. But so like the Florida manatee is unfortunately very used to boats, and they can, boating activity, human development can definitely impact their habitat. And so they live in shallow waters that definitely muddy substrate. So the waters have a high turbidity level. And so seeing their behaviors is a little harder than, say, if you're recording and listening back to their acoustic behavior. So that can give us a lot of insight into how they're communicating, if they're communicating, if they see a boat as danger, if the squeal type is an aggressive or warning call, that could kind of tell you, are they looking at a motorboat coming and warning others? Or do we need to maybe protect an area, especially if it's an area like in Florida where there is a lot of boating activity, because they don't spook as easy when they get used to human activity. So yeah, there's definitely a lot you can do with it. Thank you. Thank you for that question. Anyone else? Just check the Zoom chat.
Okay, I got one more.
Yeah,
Uh,
go.
There's a lot of questions about the Floridian manatee as well, so I got
Yeah,
one
yeah, yeah.
more on that front. Any sense of if your results are consistent with Floridian manatee reactions, if there's been more research on those, the same vocalizations as what you guess would cross over in terms of the response?
Yeah, that's great. So far, I believe there's only like one or two, a couple of wild Floridian manatee research projects that have been done with playback calls specifically. I know there's some captive research being done to compare. So that's kind of part of what my future research will entail is, are they responding the same way? Are the results consistent? So yeah, that's kind of like what my future research will be definitely involving. So I will get back to you. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? And oh, looks like the chat is active. Okay, great. Just checking if there's any questions. Great, thank you guys. Thanks everyone for coming, both virtually. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to congratulate you on being the forefront of this groundbreaking research. It's astonishing that you really went to the police and you really did conduct these incredible tests and you got to be right there with them. That is
Yeah, it was
really
amazing.
extraordinary. So
Yes,
congratulations.
and thank you to my external committee members who definitely helped make this happen, and thank you to the IIC. It definitely was a collaborative effort, but thank you for your compliment.
Cool.
All right, I'll stop
There's
sharing.
no other questions.
All right, thank you guys for coming virtually. Thank you.
Great.
All right, I'm going to end the Zoom now, but again, thank you guys for attending virtually. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to email me. And yeah, thank you for coming.
Study climate things, you kind of both. Yeah, right.
That was